Okay, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, we would like to continue with the two keynote speakers, and it is a great privilege for me to, and I start on my right-hand side, to introduce to you Petr Drulák, who is, as from the 7th of February 2014, the first Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, and I think we thank you very much, Petr Drulák, that you are with us today, despite a very tight schedule. We all know that with the current problems in the Ukraine, the Foreign Ministry of the Czech Republic is also very busy with that. A few words to the person, Petr Drulák. Most of you know him very well. I'd like to stress just 2 points. Petr Drulák was for all in all 15 years with the Institute of International Relations, and of which he was 9 years director of the institute. After that, as from 2012, he used to be professor in the Institute of Political Studies and Institute of International Studies at the Charles University in Prague. He has published numerous articles and essays about foreign policy issues, and as I said, is today here in his new position and function as the first Deputy Minister of the Czech Republic. And I would like to give the floor directly to Petr Drulák because we only have 1 hour time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mirko. It's always a great pleasure for me to accept the invitation for an event which is organized by Friedrich-Ebert Foundation, by my former institution as well. So it's really a pleasure to be here, even though, as Mirko already suggested, it was not so easy for me to get prepared for this, because in my previous incarnation, I really could take some leisure and could think days and weeks before I delivered a speech. Today, it's more about hours and minutes, so I would not actually dare to classify what I'm supposed to deliver as a keynote speech. It's sort of a collection of remarks which I find important when we think about the theme of the conference, which is populism in Europe, which is a topical theme because we are a few months from the European elections, and we can see that there is actually a strong rise of populist parties around Europe who take the European Union as their target, which is a very disturbing development. So let me start with a very brief reflection on what I understand as a populism, even though I believe that you already discussed that. But my simple operational definition is that when we talk about populism, we talk about political leaders who try to offer simple and false, usually false, simple and false solutions to complex problems. Because when we deal with politics, when we deal with the society, we do not have actually any simple solutions. Because it's one of the, I think the essence of politics consists in the fact that we deal with the dilemmas. We always, when we make choice, we can always argue that the choice is in many respects good, but in many respects bad as well. We don't live in the world which would be black and white. So in this respect, when we make political choices, we have to take into account all kinds of norms, and we have to make normative choices, which means that we have to make choices between conflicting norms. In this respect, political choices are always can be criticized for being bad, but we usually talk actually about the choices which are bad and less bad. We do not often have good solutions. When we put this into contrast, this political reality, when we contrast this political reality with the rhetoric of populism, then the picture of the world which they offer is very simple. They live in black and white world, which is easy, where all the solutions are easy to get. And for most populist politicians, they need the image of the enemy, because enemy is something which makes your message really understandable to broad masses. And it fits into this black and white picture, because the populist leaders picture themselves as white knights who fight against the black evil, black enemy. And there are all kinds of varieties of who the enemy can be. There are many choices. There are many scapegoats. You can have scapegoats in the shape of poor people who are said to be lazy, who do not contribute enough to society, who just actually eat from the common cake without contributing much. That's sort of a right-wing neoliberal populism, which is actually quite widespread in Europe. But of course, you can take it also from another perspective, and you can see rich people as scapegoats. All these people who concentrate all the riches in their hand and they do not want to share anything. And if we get rid of them, then we will have paradise on the earth. That's left-wing populism, also quite dangerous. There is often, many populist movements are actually directed against minorities, where you are able actually to blame all the evils in the society on the presence and activity of a specific minority. In the European past, like 70 years ago, this role has often been fulfilled by Jews, where people actually put all the blame on Jews in Central Europe, but not only in Central Europe, in Europe as a whole. Today, we have different scapegoats. Today, in Czech Republic, favorite scapegoats are Roma or gypsies. In Western Europe, it's very often people who are somehow related with Islam, Muslims. They are seen actually as the source of social evils. And that's why it's so efficient actually to campaign against them. You can actually score many political points by defining this group as a source of the evil. So in this respect, vulnerable groups are very often target of populist campaigns. But you have also other choices, foreigners, which is sort of a standard rhetoric of the nation state. The state is here to protect you against evil foreigners who plot some nefarious plans which are here to destabilize your society, your political structures. So evil foreigners. And I mean, in the recent years, it's more and more. You can the scapegoat, the favorite scapegoat are bureaucrats, yeah? The bureaucracy. Now I'm actually bureaucrat, so I'm more sensitive against these accusations than before. And indeed, there are many bad things about bureaucracy, but we actually need bureaucracy. And it's actually quite cheap when people actually lead their crusades against bureaucracy as being the source of all the evil. I mentioned this bureaucratic aspect because it's very actually popular when we talk about the European Union. Because when people today talk in public about the European Union in public space, then European bureaucracy is a very favored topic. It's like an obvious target. If you want to say something about Europe, you often actually attack European bureaucracy, and nobody will contradict you. Which is again quite misleading, because European bureaucracy, big as it is and rigid as it is, no doubts about this, is actually usually more efficient and usually smaller than national bureaucracies. So if we had a sort of a very consistent attack against European bureaucracy, we would have to start with the national state, with the national bureaucracies, or municipal bureaucracies. But again, I don't say that we should target them, or we should target them in a rational manner, not in the manner of a populist backlash, because these things are simply needed. What I find today really disturbing is this scapegoating of the European Union, where European Union is actually is blamed for all kinds of deficiencies and all kinds of evils. Not that the EU would be perfect. Well, there are many things about the European Union which do not work and which should work much better, and there are good reasons to be critical about the European Union. But we should not forget, actually, that for the most essential problems, for the essential problems we face today, the EU is part of the solution. Maybe, to some extent, it can be part of the problem too, but primarily it is part of the solutions. Because the most problems which we face in Europe today cannot be solved without a kind of a European concerted action. And when we actually criticize the European institutions for their effectiveness, then the correct answer is not how to get rid of them or how to make them weaker, but how to make them better, how to make them actually stronger in many respects. Because the European institutions are actually, quite weak. Today, what are the most important problems of today? Well, there are, of course, social problems linked with the fact that we have highly integrated markets in goods, in capital, in services, even in services. But we do not have highly integrated regulation. And you cannot have civilized market without regulation. I think it's one of the messages, actually, of the German Wirtschaftswunder, of this unique economic achievement which Germany achieved in the first decades after the World War II. So this achievement tells us or teaches us that you have to have, that market is important indeed, but market has to be embedded in strong political institutions. And if you try to cultivate markets without institutions, then it usually leads to disaster. It's disaster, because markets will not create these institutions on its own. That was one of the failures, or one of the misunderstandings, which were part of the transformation of many countries, Central European countries and other countries. The idea that you have to simply let market play itself, let market forces free, and that these free market forces will create their own the institutions of their own regulation. It does not work like this, actually. You need political authority. And as long as all the economic activity takes place within the nation state, then obviously the nation state is the place where you can actually develop this kind of regulatory activities. But once you are in the situation when the economic activities are globalized, internationalized, then you need internationalized regulation framework. And given the state of the play in Europe, it's only the European Union who can provide it. And if the EU does not provide it, well, there are two reasons for this. One is that that our institutions are not strong enough. European institutions are not strong enough. They cannot simply do it because nations try to keep key competencies at their level, like taxation and social measures. And there is also another reason, not only that the EU institutions are weak, sometimes they are actually quite strong, but we don't have enough political courage to use them. And that's a failure of mainstream politicians, not of populist politicians, but of the mainstream politicians. These mainstream politicians actually who do not allow Europe to really develop, who have actually institutional tools for this, but they do not want to give up on their own competencies, even though these competencies are actually quite empty. Because even states which are relatively big in Europe, states like France, Germany, are actually quite small given the global markets and given the global issues which they face. So in this respect, for me, I don't see actually the populism as the main issue, as the main threat, because it's only derivation, it's only consequence of something which is rotten. And these rotten things are in the mainstream politics, in the lack of political courage of these leaders who should know actually, and who know. but who do not dare to present these choices to their people, who do not dare to discuss Europe openly, who actually stress their own national solutions. And then they wonder that there is someone to the right of them or to the left of them who is able actually to exceed their rhetoric. So this is the failure of today. Populism, radical movements are only the consequence, symptoms of the main illness, and this main illness is in the mainstream politics. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your inputs, and I have no doubt that there will be a reaction, or even more than one reaction to it later in the discussion. I would propose we move right on, and I would like to introduce the second keynote speaker. To my left is Ernst Hillebrand. He is head of department of the International Policy Analysis in the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung in Berlin. Ernst is not only a colleague, we know each other for more than 20 years, and saying that, Ernst Hillebrand has been, among other posts, director of various FES offices in Europe, France, United Kingdom, in Latin America and in Africa. Before his current position, he was the head of the Department for Central and Eastern Europe in Berlin. He has been member of numerous editorial boards and published numerous publications on different international reviews in newspapers. He is working for the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung since 1990, and it is my pleasure to ask Ernst Hillebrand to talk to you about the topic how to deal with the rise of populism in Europe.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mirko, and thanks to you, to the audience and the organizers of this conference for having me here with a short contribution. It's always a great pleasure to be in Prague. I like this city, and it was my first tentative to get a look behind the Iron Curtain in the 1980s was in 1984, when I made my first trip to the east, to Czechoslovakia at that time, to Prague, and already at that time I really liked the city. So it's to be here. It's a great pleasure, and thank you for inviting me. Now, I will try to look from a center-left perspective, in a certain sense, on the question of how to deal with populism. I'm working for the party foundation of the German Social Democratic Party, and in my work at Paris and London, of course, I saw how center-left parties in the UK and in France were deeply preoccupied by what was going on the fringes of their political party system. If you are today in Paris, you will be surprised to see what centrality the question of how to deal with the Front National has acquired in the public debate. When I left Paris in 2010, the normal question left-wing politicians were asking themselves was, what does this mean for Sarkozy? Now they directly ask, what does this mean for the rise or the fall or the fate of the Front National? It is the central thing, their whole political thinking turns around. And a slightly similar picture, amazingly enough, you will find in the United Kingdom, where the rise of UKIP really preoccupies not only the Conservative, the Tories, but also the Labour Party very deeply. So, there has been, in that context, there has been an interesting paper presented last year by Policy Network, the Third Way think tank in London, by a British political scientist, Anthony Painter. And he titled his paper as Democratic Stress, the Populist Signal and the Extremist Threat. And I think that was a really important and interesting paper because he insisted on the fact that there is a problem, that there is stress in our democracies, and that the rise of populism is a signal for a real existing unease within our societies, not just something weird or strange going on, but it's a signal for something deep in our societies. And I think we have to try to understand this populist signal correctly to be able to get a correct diagnosis and then also to have a correct remedy for this development. So I will try to start my speech with what I think that populism is, and I will try to define it by what it is not, because we have some normal reflexes and stereotypes when we treat right-wing populism or populism generally, we have our ideas what it is, and I think most of our received ideas which we apply to these movements are slightly or thoroughly wrong. So first of all, I think the rise of populism does not represent something like a full-scale shift to the right of our society. That's a topic you hear very often in France, la droitisation de la société française. That's the French society shifting to the right. And I think this is completely wrong, honestly. I think you have to put the rise of Western European populism into a context, and the context is that of extremely liberal societies. We are living in the most liberal and hedonistic societies you will find on this planet, much more liberal than anything that we have had as societies in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So it's a context of society that are deeply marked by values and cultural norms of hedonistic, permissive, liberal, tolerant societies. And the voters of populist parties do come from the midst of the societies. It's extremely difficult to find sociological specificities of those voters. They're just ordinary citizens in any respect. And they share most of the values and norms of these liberal and tolerant societies. They are consumerist in the sense of Zygmunt Bauman. Some of them may be failed consumers, but still their prevailing dominant ideology, that of a consumerist societies, which are per definition also hedonistic and tolerant societies. Now, let me give you two examples for how the rise of right-wing populism is embedded in liberal societies in the West. The first is the referendum in Switzerland on the 9th of February. Where, you know, you all have heard of it, this referendum of mass immigration. But on that day, the Swiss people had to decide upon 3 referenda. The first one was the one on mass immigration. The second one was one asking for long-term public state funding, tax funding for the railway infrastructure in Switzerland. And the third one was a proposal again of this right-wing populist party, the SVP, to exclude abortion costs from the coverage of public health care schemes, assurance system. Now, how did the Swiss population vote? They clearly adopted the proposal to put heavy public money into the railway structure. They clearly rejected the proposal of the populists to exclude abortion costs from the public health scheme, and they adopted, with a small minority, the proposal to limit mass immigration to Switzerland. So in 2 of the 3 referendums, they voted for the proposals of the left parties or the liberal parties, and only one they voted for the right-wing parties. So there is no clear-cut picture of a shift to the right in that referendum. It will be extremely stupid, I think, to interpret it as this one. It's much more complex. And another example, I think, is the rise of the Dutch right-wing populism. We have to remember that this movement started to thrive under Pim Fortuyn. Pim Fortuyn was a flamboyant gay politician from Rotterdam who started to become politically active on a national level when there has campaigning on a series of incidents where gay couples walking home in the evening of Dutch cities were attacked by Muslim youths who, for their religious and cultural norms, do refuse homosexuality. And the campaign slogan was, "We want our old Netherlands back," a very liberal and tolerant societies where exactly gay couples could walk home in the evening hand in hand, being molested by youths who do not share their values. That was the capital, the cultural capital Pim Fortuyn has been building his political movement on. And it has been a failure of the Dutch left. They accept it today that it has been a failure. Not to stand up in the name of multiculturalism, they refuse to do so. Not to stand up in this case for the values of a tolerance and sexual freedoms. And they just abided, they accepted in the name of multiculturalism this, from their own standpoint, very deviant behavior. And so I think that the timidness with which the left has reacted to this kind of threat from, in this case, the sexual intolerance of a religion, there are others who are sexually intolerant, Christianity as well, just opened a space for this type of right-wing populism of Pim Fortuyn. It's an irony that today the right-wing movement that defend the hedonistic societies created by the 1968 movement and the old 1968 activists just dare not speak up against the threats to the very society they created. Now, another error we have to avoid, I think, to treat these people as yesterday's people. That's a tendency, oh, these are old-fashioned, living in the past, their national ideas, just don't understand the future. That's not true. I mean, if you look at the voting schemes, you will see that right-wing populist parties do extremely well among young and first-time voters. In the Netherlands, in Austria, in France. So it's not necessarily yesterday's people. And if you look, for example, in France, you have today 30% of the members of Front National are younger than 30 years. That's an extremely high figure, and it's rising. And in the opinion polls of last month, 30%, a third of the French people declared that they share the values of the Front National. That's the highest figure ever recorded since 25 years for Front National. So I don't think it's intelligent to treat these people as yesterday's people. And then I don't think they are authoritarian in a classical politically scientific sense. They are not authoritarian. They demand the right as democratic citizens to express their opinion. And what they feel is that the democratic elites have become cartelized. It's a closed elites group that runs the country that does not respond any longer to the demands that come up from society. So they are insisting on the democratic character. They want to send a signal. They want to be led. They want the political elites to understand their grievances and interests. That's the logic of populism in that sense. And intelligent populist leaders, of course, present themselves not as the leaders who lead the ignorant masses to the light. That's the 19th century or 20th century. Modern populist leaders present to be the resonance body of the interests and demands of the democratic sovereign, the citizens. So I think it would be erroneous to try to frame these movements as authoritarian. They are not authoritarian, at least not by the values of their voters. Now, if these movements are not authoritarian, not illiberal, not yesterday's people, what are they? I think populist movements do express a sense of unease, a sense of alienation that exists well within our societies. People just don't feel any longer represented or a part of the people by the system, political system just as it exists. They feel let down by mainstream parties and have the feeling that ordinary people are no longer adequately represented within an elitist political system. And I think it's part of the responsibility, especially of the left, to have created this atmosphere, because I think we have committed in the last years, last decade, some serious errors which have allowed these movements to thrive. And I will name three of the things that I think are most problematic in the development of center-left parties in the last 2 decades that have opened the space for populist movement. First of all, I think there are clearly socioeconomic trends. What we have seen in the last 20 years or 25 years is a clear redistribution from below to above. We have rising Gini indexes all over the Western world, also in Western Europe. The level of inequality within our societies is rising constantly. We have a growing imbalance in taxation. It's ordinary citizens' income that is taxed ever higher. Capital gains and profits are taxed ever lower. So in the end, it adds up to a shrinking wage share in gross national product, whereas the share of profits is rising constantly. So we have a clear distribution within our societies from the poor to the wealthy. And this, of course, sucks out legitimacy out of a democratic system. And then we have, of course, high term levels of unemployment. We get used in the last decades to figures like 8% or 10%. But if you judge them by the long-term standard of the 20th century, they are extremely high. They are just as high as in the collapsing Weimar Republic. But we just think it's normal, and we have established better social welfare systems which allow these people to survive better. We have shifting labor markets where women are more active, so the fact that there's one member of family working and the other is jobless, is increasingly present, so it mitigates a little bit the effects. But the long-term standards of unemployment are extremely high, standards of Western industrial society. And we have, in this context, of course, still opted for politics of mass immigration, open borders, etc., which have added to the pressure on the labor market. It would be completely naive and empiric not to recognize the fact that this has created additional pressure on the labor market. Of course it has. Well, how could it be different? Now, the second point, I think, is the ideological change of left parties. They have been workers' parties in a certain sense, and they have become liberal parties of the left. And being liberal party of the left meant, with the new labor style in Neue Mitte in Germany, a hands-off approach towards the economy. We did not interfere too much in the economy. We did not opt for clear distributional politics in the interests of our voters, but we concentrated on social cultural issues, on societal questions, liberal politics, on minority rights, multiculturalism, pro-immigration stance, universalistic values. That was the main axis of governance activity of center-left governments in the last 20 years. And the values of our parties have changed in this time. There's a brilliant book by Jonathan Haidt, The Righteous Mind, where he describes the change of the value base of liberal parties or left-wing parties in the US and in Europe. And whereas the mindset, the value base of our voters, blue-collar, classical, working-class constituents, didn't change. It stayed the same. But our value system changed totally over the last 35, 40 years, since 1968, or generally the midst of the 1960s, and the hedonistic revolution in the Western societies. And this was accompanied by a deep sociological change of center-left parties. They used to be workers' parties, and today they are parties of academic lower middle classes and of state employees, if you look. Working class people are almost no longer present in these parties, 2-3% in some of these parties. The party with the highest share of working class people under its membership in Germany is the CSU, the very conservative party of Bavaria. SPD has a far lower level of working class membership than the CSU. So with this change of the sociological substance of center-left parties, there has been rising an atmosphere of what Richard Sennett has called, talking about New Labour in the UK, as class contempt. Those uprising, upwards mobile, white-collar employees looked with a certain disdain to their blue-collar cousins which stayed in their working-class communities, had no real energy to get it off. And people feel this growing distance between center-left parties and their traditional constituencies. And this created, again, the void where this type of populism could really break in. Now, what can we do? I will just be short because I think time is running up. I think we have, first of all, do politics of recognition in style and substance. We have to show respect for what people have been doing in the last 25 years or 30 years, the sacrifice they have been committing, the acceptance also of immigration, for example. I mean, Tanya spoke about restrictive immigration policies in European Union. Now we have lots of big cities in Europe where 50% of the population are of migrant background. And that was in one generation. I mean, when I was born, there was most probably 2%. Now there are 50% in cities like Rotterdam or London. To call this restrictive immigration policies is a kind of counterintuitive for the people living in this society, in these cities. So I think we should have a much more positive stance to what the extent of tolerance and acceptance our societies have shown towards all these changes that have been put upon them in the last decades. I think that's absolutely important to be done. And then we have, of course, to show a bit more respect for the legitimacy of their strive to maintain the world they are living in. They don't want to be exhorted to permanent change. They just want to continue to live the way they're living. They're happy with that. And there is this kind of contempt for this desire to maintain the world you know and you like. And I think here again we have to come up with a completely different discourse of acceptance and recognition in the sense of Axel Honneth for the people among you who like social science literature. Concretely, we have to do much more on socio-economic questions. We have to reverse the distributional trends of neoliberalism. We have to strengthen labor again in its negotiation position. We have to re-regulate labor markets to get rid of that feeling of being powerless in your daily life, in the economic field. We have to strengthen co-determination rights of workers again. And we have to strengthen ownership rights of workers in the enterprises they work with. They have to be transformed into real stakeholders in the enterprises they work with. And then we have to strengthen democracy. Direct democracy has been mentioned as one of the demands of populist movements. I would think it is essentially that the left makes demand for more direct participation one of its core issues when concerning the future of our political system. People want to have a stronger say in their political decision-taking processes. And it's totally logic. The representative system essentially has been constructed at the end of the 18th century in the way it functions. Societies where perhaps 5% of the population could read and write. Today we have societies with 60% that pass secondary education. Of course these people know more. And they have a different sense of what should be legitimate agency they have in the society they live in. And we have to respect that. And culturally, I mean, the whole question of multiculturalism and immigration is one of the driving forces of populist unease. And so I think we have to tackle it anyhow. We cannot avoid it any longer. And I think we have to come up with something like politics of positive identity, which respects the need of a sense of belonging that most people do have. It should be concentrating much on local identities. I think you can build around the notion of a city identity a very inclusive element of identity. Cities tend to be extremely heterogeneous, culturally, linguistically, religiously. And I think you can reconstruct a sense of common identity around local identities, city identities. And of course we have to also think hard about, we can take away the pride in national identity, which today is more or less monopolized by right-wing populist forces, and bring it back into the realm of legitimate political identity politics also of the left. People tend to be proud of the country they live in, and it should not be anathema also for left forces to accept that feeling and that necessity of people to be part of something like a greater community. We have to come up with a positive discourse on that. If not, people will no longer accept this. Now, one closing remark on Germany, because AfD has been mentioned. Now we have for the first time in Germany something like a populist movement in Germany, Alternative für Deutschland. They failed by 0.3 percentage points to enter into the new Bundestag. Most probably they will, of course, they will be elected to the European Parliament. There's no doubt about that. The interesting thing is, if you look at the ideology of this party, it essentially has been constructed around criticism of the Euro rescue politics of the last government. It is essentially formulated by trained academic economists, so not ignorant people from the fringes of society, but from the very midst of it, who have good economic arguments to say that the kind of rescue policy as it has been pursued in the last 5 years has some serious flaws and problems with it. And now they're starting to combine this economics critic of the Euro rescue packages with a more classical right-wing populist flavor, and most probably it will be kind of successful in the European elections. And so it's well possible that we will end up in the next decade also with a right-wing populist party in Germany for the first time since the Second World War, because up to now the taboo of right-wing populism has been very strong in German society. Nativist thinking is, because of the historical background of fascism, has been so strongly tabooized in our society that it is a difficult capital to build on. But I think we will see this strong, coming in the next couple of years. So thank you very much for taking so much of your time. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks to both speakers again. I think both contributions provoked a few questions or a few remarks from your side. So we would like to, we have about 15 minutes to 20 minutes before lunch to open the floor. And I would like to ask anybody who would like to ask a question to use the microphone and shortly introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. My name is Smiljana Knez, Ambassador of the Republic of Slovenia. Although this discussion or my remark will be more on in my personal capacities, I thank you, the organizers, of course, for this timely and very, very important debate in the run-up to the European elections. In the first part, of course, we were listening to the discussion on right-wing extremism, although I would add also left-wing extremism. There are not so big differences between the two, most probably. We've heard about the example or a case of one particular country, and also a lot of interesting remarks from the last panelist. I would ask, maybe for a comment, Mr. Drulák, I appreciated a lot the sort of a list of otherness, of scapegoats that are sort of often in the populist discourse. And my impression is that the European Union was also mentioned as a particular scapegoat. But my impression is that in the run-up to the election, in the pre-election campaign, all these scapegoats will sort of emerge into one. So we will have migrants, and then, of course, those populists who built upon anti-migration politics will, of course, turn against EU, because EU is allowing too much of it. Then we will have, most probably, anti-Roma populism, that EU funds are providing too much funds for Roma's integration. So most probably, but I would really like to hear a comment, because I'm really not an expert in this, whether do you expect that the discourse in the run-up to the European election will be broader than just, you know, simple, what is coming out of the EU is bad, as we hear here and there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I would propose we collect one or two more questions and ask our keynote speakers to answer. Please, Vladimir Handel.
Yes, Vladimir Handel from the Institute of International Relations. I have a question to Petr Drulák. First of all, we will discuss in the afternoon, and you will not attend this part of the conference, we will discuss the implication of the growing influence and presence of populist parties in the European Parliament on European policy making. Could you speculate from your point of view, what do you expect will be the political result and implication for European policy making given the coming European elections? And on the Alternative für Deutschland, I would like to ask you whether the Alternative für Deutschland is going to attract also the voters and the people who actually prefer usually to vote for leftist Alternative for Politik in Germany. As we see in the last elections, that there was quite a substantial support for Alternative für Deutschland from the Linke and this kind of political scene. Do you expect this again? Do you expect the Alternative to become the sort of critical voice and the protest party against whatever European bureaucracy and globalization through European Union? Thank you.
Thank you, Vladimir. One more question?
Thank you very much. Vladimir Bilčík, Slovak Foreign Policy Association. I would actually like to ask a question picking up on Petr Drulák's basic argument that European integration is something we ought to see as an opportunity. And of course, many of us, especially in Central Europe, saw it as an opportunity in the 1990s and perhaps even later. But today, that sort of political position is a real challenge. So my question to you is, and more in a position of politician now, how do you take it up as an opportunity? How do you communicate it? What's the strategy to actually in our region, or even in the Czech Republic, to pick up that challenge to take it up as an opportunity in public discourse and in public policy? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to start and asking Petr Drulák. There is a whole range of questions and topics directly posed to your or aimed to you, so please.
Thank you. Well, none of these questions is actually easy. I'm grateful for it because they are deep questions. I'm not sure whether I will be able to give any deep answer to this, but I will try to give you my immediate reactions. So first to Smiljana, I think these populist campaigns, we do not have actually pan-European populist campaigns. They are actually in each country, there are different problems, different campaigns, different kinds of problems. In Czech Republic, I do not expect migration to be a big issue. Unlike countries in the southern Europe who are more exposed to these issues, because populists need to have something on which they can build. They need to mobilize prejudices which exist. And so currently, this does not seem to be the issue in Czech Republic, migration. It's quite interesting actually to observe how the anti-EU, how the parties who are critical about the EU or deeply skeptical about the EU, how they will develop their own pre-campaign strategy. Because some of them were part of the government, but we have also small populist parties who would argue for our leaving the European Union. But right now it seems to me that despite the fact that the Czech public opinion is more skeptical about the European institutions than it used to be a few years ago, I don't think actually that this is something which would really make them win elections. I don't see actually any big issues which would actually evoke a popular hatred about the European Union. There can be some things which make people somewhat skeptical, like this favored European bureaucracy, but that's not really a vote winner. So in this respect, I do not actually, at least in Czech Republic, I would be surprised if there were a strong anti-EU backlash during the current EU elections. Vladimir Handl raised actually a more general question: what will happen in the European Parliament once we have actually the situation in which established parties may get a smaller share of the vote, and a bigger share of the vote goes to the parties who are somehow unorthodox, maybe populist, anti-EU. Well, there are actually two issues or two strategies how you can face it. The first strategy is the strategy of sort of you could call it democratic cooperation or a front or a cartel of so-called responsible parties against the others. I think it's actually a bad strategy, because this is the strategy of the vicious circle. Because because we have these three families of parties who are basically pro-European and who actually ran the show for the past 50 years. It's a family of Christian Democratic Party, of Socialist Party, of Liberal parties. These three party families are basically the party families which are decisive. Now, if they gang up together, they will just reinforce the populist message, which will say, look, you know, these people are completely out of touch, they are part of the same group, and we are the real alternative. So in this respect, I don't believe that these three parties should somehow cooperate closely. No, they should actually lead the campaign. I mean, they should deliver their own fair, democratic pre-election fight. There should not be a cartel between them. But what to do if this strategy if this is not a good strategy? How to face it? And there is another strategy, and that's one of the things which were actually mentioned by Ernst Hillebrand. Some of the issues which are picked up by Populist should be actually taken by the mainstream discourse, but in a responsible manner. So they should be acknowledged as problems. Actually, stealing, in many respects, it's about stealing part of the populist agenda without stealing the populist solutions. So actually, these mainstream parties should not be afraid of these issues. They are here, but they should be actually able to explain that these issues do not have these simple solutions which are offered by populists. And this actually brings me to the last question by Vlado, which is actually a question about what is to be done. And it's somehow, it seems to me that, you know, the way I observe politics, basically still as outsider, because I don't see myself as a politician, but indeed I work with politicians, and maybe I have a bit more insights into the political field than I used to have as academic, and these insights are quite fresh. So they are not really mature, and they must be subject to a thorough scrutiny. But still, it seems to me that one of the most important virtues, well, there are two virtues which a politician needs to have, and these two virtues are somehow related with the question which we are discussing right now. The first virtue is responsibility, and the second is courage. So there must be a good mixture of courage and responsibility. And the more I observe actually the political decision making and what is at stake, the more actually I feel the need for courage, because that's something which courage and responsibility in many respects go against each other. Because if you are courageous, if you make courageous moves, you open many boxes, you open many changes, and changes are unpredictable. So you never know how the things will end up. We are in society. Society is always full of unpredictable, unseen, unforeseeable consequences. So once you start doing changes, then you will face the things which you didn't want to do, which is basically a bit irresponsible, because you open the things which you don't have under control. But sometimes you simply have to be courageous enough to do this, because if you simply continue with the way, if you continue just reproducing the things as they are, you may seem responsible, because it's sort of you do not want to go into new areas, but it's actually self-defeating, because then you actually then you leave the room for populists who will say, look at them, they don't care about this. So for me, the virtue of courage and responsibility, of these two virtues are actually essential for a political success, and they are essential for the European Union. Because now it actually requires courageous politicians to say that we need stronger Europe. We need stronger European institutions. Who dares to say this? Even the parties who proclaim to be pro-European are very wary of anything which could strengthen the Commission, which would strengthen the Parliament. We have to be open about this and say, yes, indeed, we need these institutions to be stronger than they are today. And for me, these moves are both courageous and responsible.
Thank you. There was one question by Vladimir Handel regarding the Alternative für Deutschland, and I would ask Ernst to.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think it's not yet quite clear what will be happening. I think the fact that there has been a considerable part of ex-left or the Die Linke voters that went to the AfD in the last federal election came as a big surprise for almost everybody. I mean, for the party itself, for mainstream political observers, for pollsters, and so there is an indicator that they might be able to tap into a larger reservoir of anti-system unease that exists, of course, in German society as in most other societies. But I think they have recruited now Olaf Henkel, the former head of the German Employers Association, as their leading candidate for their European elections campaign. And Henkel is one of the most notorious talking heads of neoliberal politics that Germany has known the last 15 years. So he's so clearly associated with a neoliberal right-wing social and economic position that it would be very hard for any decent left voter to make his cross with a party that's represented by Mr. Henkel. So we do not yet know really how this bet turns out, but of course Henkel might reinforce the image of the party as a party of economic expertise, people who know how the economy is functioning, and that's, in the end, that's the main argument. That's a party of academic trained economists, lots of university professors, conservative, an ex-editor of the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. So it's really traditional bourgeois milieu that's represented at the top of this party. And Henkel fits perfectly into that picture, and he might be able to mobilize people from the more conservative milieus, but also ex-FDP voters who are looking for a new political home. In the end, my personal hunch is that it will depend very much on the campaign the CDU will be running. CDU has been very intelligently running a campaign in the federal elections as we are defending German interests in Europe. Leave it to Mutti. Merkel, she will defend your interests in Europe. Germany is an island of stability in a sea of irrationality and instability. And she has captured that feeling that people wanted to be protected against the volatility that come out of the European system. And AfD will try to do something similar. And it depends now whether the CDU will be able to repeat the trick of the federal elections to present itself to unsecure voters as the best bet to defend their own interest in this unsecure European environment. If CDU runs again a good campaign in that sense, AfD will not score very high. If they fail to do so, they have a serious chance to get a seriously good result.
Thank you very much to both speakers. Ernst, for your very clear picture about the German realities at the moment and the forecast, and in particular to Petr Drulák, who, despite, as we all know, a full calendar, spent an hour with us and I think gave us a lot of support and also courage to take your words to go on. And I think especially your last sentences show that you already are a courageous and responsible politician in a way, if you go on like that. In any case, I think I speak on behalf of the audience if we wish you lots of success in your new position and for the Czech Republic in the years to come. And I would like to invite the audience and the speakers to a small lunch, and the proceedings will start at 2 o'clock, and Lucia Neischlova will chair the next panel, and I wish you bon appetit.